Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Bill Lumsden here, Master Distiller for Glenmorangie and Ardbeg. Thank you very much for joining me for today's tasting. And I'm actually speaking to you from my sensory laboratory here at the company head office in Edinburgh. So this is where I put together all the final recipes for our whiskies. One or two points of housekeeping just before we launch into the tasting. You can download some props, some aids to help you through the tasting, including a tasting mat and some booklets giving you some details about the whiskies we're going to taste today. And if you have any questions, you can ask them in real time by tweeting them to hashtag TWM Virtual Tasting. Now, as you can see in front of me, we have a range of 3 whiskies we're going to taste today. I'm going to start off with a tasting of our company's flagship expression, the Glenmorangie Original. I'm then going to introduce you to a delicious new Glenmorangie in the range, which we're calling Glenmorangie A Tale of Cake. And then finally, we're going to taste the latest addition to our core range of Ardbeg whiskies, which we're calling the Ardbeg Beastie. Now, there are 2 single malt whisky distilleries in our company. We have the legendary Glenmorangie Distillery in the Northern Highlands of Scotland, and we have the Ardbeg Distillery on the island of Islay off the west coast of Scotland. And it's great to have these 2 whiskies in the portfolio because in terms of taste, I think there are no 2 whiskies further apart in the world of Scotch whisky. I'm going to say a bit more about the Ardbeg Distillery when we come to do the tasting. So in terms of Glenmorangie, it's a whisky I know very well. I've been with the company now for 25 years and I started off my career with Glenmorangie as distillery manager. My actual involvement with Glenmorangie goes way back, much further than that, however, because Glenmorangie was the very first single malt Scotch whisky I ever tasted in my life, way back in 1984. And of course, the Glenmorangie Distillery is famous for making arguably the most complex, most delicate whisky in the whole of the Scotch whisky industry. So at the Glenmorangie Distillery, we have a unique source of water. We have very, very unusual, hard, mineral-rich water, which contributes to the amazing complexity of our spirit. We distill using the tallest pot stills in the whole of the Scotch whisky industry, which adds this perfumed complexity to our spirit. And we mature our spirit in the very finest oak barrels found in the industry. And in fact, I have a lot of these barrels made to my own unique specification. So these 3 things are quite unique to the Glenmorangie Distillery. Now, we're going to start the tasting off by reminding ourselves, because I'm sure you all know this whisky already, but remind ourselves of the wonderful taste of Glenmorangie Original. This is a very, very personal whisky to me because, as I mentioned a moment or so ago, way back in 1984, this was in fact the very first single malt Scotch whisky I ever tasted. And I was so amazed by the intriguing, complex, delicious taste of this whisky that I decided there and then that my future career path lay in the Scotch whisky industry. So there's a nice sense of destiny that I'm now responsible for the quality of this whisky. This is the flagship expression in the Glenmorangie range. For many, many people, this is the classic taste of Glenmorangie. And if anyone wants to know what Glenmorangie is all about, this is the one I would point them towards. So this is all matured for a minimum of 10 years in these handcrafted, hand-selected American oak ex-bourbon barrels. And this type of barrel is well known in the Scotch whisky industry because it adds a softness, a creaminess to your final whisky, but most importantly, it allows your unique house character, your own unique DNA, if you like, to shine through. So all of these herbal, floral, complex compounds we find in the spirit, you still taste them after 10 years of maturation. So please join me, ladies and gents, now in tasting the Glenmorangie Original. The first thing I will draw your attention to is the colour. The colour is a beautiful, natural, bright gold colour, and this has actually been leached out of these toasted American oak barrels. So sometimes the colour of the whisky can give you a clue as to how it has been matured. The next thing we want to do, and I hope, ladies and gents, that like myself you have tulip-shaped glasses for this. Doesn't have to be our own branded glasses. If you've even got some small wine glasses, they would also do. But you want a slightly tulip shape, because what I'd like you to do is just gently swirl and start to inhale the bouquet of the whisky. Now, I always recommend when people do this that you keep your mouths open. And while it may make you look like a goldfish when you're doing it, what you're doing here is you're getting the vapours going up your nose and coming back out through your mouths, and thereby coming into contact with as many sensory receptors as possible. So when myself and my team are nosing professionally in the laboratory here, that's what we are doing. We're inhaling and keeping our mouths open. And when I do this, I'm now starting to find some of these lovely floral notes in the original. You know, it reminds me of rose petals, of geranium, of carnations in particular. Carnations are one of my favourite flowers, and I'm getting a little hint of that kind of sweet creaminess in the whisky here. It's up to yourselves, ladies and gents, how you want to taste this, but what I'm going to do now is just add a few drops of water. Be careful that you don't drown the whisky. You just need a few drops here. Mix it through in the glass, and now it's actually opened up the bouquet. We call this releasing the serpent in the Scotch whisky industry, and I'm now getting some of these lovely herbal top notes. You know, maybe a little bit like mint, maybe even a hint of coriander or something like that. So this is some of the compounds you actually find in the raw spirit after distillation, and with the addition of a bit of water, it just brings them out of the glass. And I love to do this particularly with the original because it underlines the incredible complexity of the whisky and brings out some of these lovely perfumed top notes. Okay, the next thing we're going to do, ladies and gents, is actually taste the whisky. And we're going to do this in 2 stages. So the first stage is to take a small sip of the whisky, you know, just to get our palates used to the intensity of flavour. So let's try that. The first thing I notice is that even although this is a distilled spirit, it's incredibly soft and gentle in the palate. You know, it's almost creamy or silky to the taste. And this is one of the things that Glenmorangie is very famous for. And I believe it's the use of these unique barrels that gives this incredible softness. The next thing now, I'm going to take a bigger sip of the whisky. I'm going to hold it in my palate for a few seconds before swallowing, and I'm really going to think in a bit more detail about the myriad flavours we find in here. So here goes. So the lovely soft flavour leads into a burst of these sweet flavours. You know, there's hints of vanilla, hints of peach in there, maybe a little bit of pear, but most importantly, and this is one of the key markers for Glenmorangie, there's lots of this going on, you know, lots of this nice zesty citrus fruit. And you know, we have a bit of fun in the company by reminding people of how to pronounce the name properly by saying Glenmorangie, which rhymes with oranges. So you get this lovely lemon and mandarin orange citrus bite to the whiskey. There's a tiny little bit of spiciness in there, but it's very gentle, you know, maybe a hint of ginger, maybe a little bit of sweet chili in there. And then once that dies down, you get a bit more of the influence of the oak wood. And it makes me think of almond or coconut or something like that. So, you know, it's a truly delicious range of flavours in there in the Glenmorangie Original. I would describe this whiskey as very more-ish, which means the flavour is so delicious, so soft, and so approachable that you want to drink a little bit more of it. So I'm now going to taste it for a third time. Oh. You know, it's just such a lovely, soft, complex, approachable whiskey. It's a very versatile whiskey. It can be enjoyed neat. It can be enjoyed with a splash of water, as I've done here today. It works really well on the rocks, and over ice it accentuates more of these basal woody flavours. Or you can even enjoy it in a range of cocktails. And again, some of the flavours I've mentioned here, particularly the ginger and the citrus fruits, makes it go very well in certain types of cocktail, like an old-fashioned, for example. So, in terms of pairing with food, ladies and gents, which is something is now very popular in the world of single malt Scotch whisky, it's a delicate whisky, so we don't want to overpower the flavours. Goes well with some nice ripe fruits, peach or mango or melon, for example. It goes very nicely with white chocolate. My own particular favourite is to have it with a nice dish with white fish or shrimp or something like that. So, you know, you can have a bit of fun trying it with all sorts of different things. But this is the Glenmorangie Original. This is what underpins the rest of the Glenmorangie range. So, ladies and gents, like myself, I trust you enjoyed reminding yourself of the delicious range of flavours found in our flagship expression, Glenmorangie Original. And this expression really does underpin the rest of the range. And I always try and make sure that every Glenmorangie whisky in the range has a little bit of the element of the original in it. So, it's time now to taste whisky number 2. And I must say, this has been one of the most exciting projects I've worked on in recent years. And we've called this Glenmorangie A Tale of Cake. Now, the story behind this goes way back more than 20 years or so ago, where I carried out a very limited experiment using some unique barrels from Hungary, which had contained the famous Hungarian Royal Tokaj wine, you know, a very, very famous dessert wine. This was just done in the small scale, and it didn't quite work as well as I had hoped, because the influence of Hungarian oak can be very, very strong. I know it always stuck in my mind, this experiment, and I was determined I was going to try again. So, much more recently, 2 to 3 years ago, I once again managed to purchase a small quantity of barrels from Hungary, which had previously held this absolutely delicious, luscious, sticky dessert wine, Hungarian Tokaj. I finished the Glenmorangie, you know, essentially Glenmorangie Original, which was then put into these barrels. I was very, very careful with the length of time I finished it for this time. And after round about 1 year, I thought, okay, I'm very, very happy with the range of flavours in there. I do not want the oak wood to dominate. So I removed the whisky from the barrel and stored it ready for bottling. So far so good. I then started to speak with my colleagues in our marketing department, And as I described the whiskey to them, it became apparent that I was using a lot of terminology which would normally be used to describe desserts, especially cakes. And you know, probably my all-time favourite cake I've ever had has been a pineapple upside down cake, which my daughter baked for me one year on my birthday. So we started exploring this concept of cakes, and the more we tasted the whiskey, the more it became apparent that this was going to go really, really well with desserts, with cakes if you like. So that's where the name A Tale of Cake came from. We then decided we were going to take this one stage further. We weren't just going to talk about cakes, we weren't just going to taste this whiskey along with cakes, but we actually paired with the world famous pastry chef Dominique Ansel, who's based in New York City just now, and he has actually worked with us to create a stunning range of desserts to go with the whiskey. And we've also developed some drinks which we're calling cake tales. See what we've done there, ladies and gents? So A Tale of Cake has been an absolutely amazing project to work with, and you can see, you know, a recreation of the packaging here. I just love this. It's very disruptive. It's not at all like the old-fashioned image people sometimes have about single malt Scotch whisky. And again, I think this just accentuates the fact that, you know, for Glenmorangie, we say to people, don't worry too much about how it's made. Don't worry too much about the process. Just remember that Glenmorangie is simply delicious. That's all you need to know about it. So, ladies and gents, after that rather lengthy introduction, let's now taste Glenmorangie A Tale of Cake. The first thing to notice is it's a deeper colour than the original. You know, there's two reasons for that. This is an older whiskey. This is a few more years of age to it. But, you know, in particular, it's leached out some extra colour from the finishing period in these Hungarian Tokaj wine barrels. And it's probably even teased out a tiny little bit of the residue of the wine itself. I've decided to bottle this at slightly higher strength. This is 46% alcohol by volume, and that's because I wanted this whiskey to be non-chill filtered. So I've left the natural oils there in here just to give a little bit more of the texture to the whiskey. So once again, let's start off by impersonating a goldfish and inhaling the bouquet of this amazing whiskey. Now, you know, the very first thing I got there, ladies and gents, was this lovely pineapple-y type flavour. And you know, you can be forgiven for thinking I'm ever so slightly obsessed with pineapple. It is my favourite fruit. I just love it. And I just love the fact that this whiskey is actually reminding me of that delicious pineapple upside down cake cooked for me by my daughter. There's other things in there, you know, it's like peach, it's like lychee. There's quite a lot of white chocolate in there. And you know, I'm now starting to find some familiar Glenmorangie flavours. But I'm just going to open this up again. I'm going to release my Serpent. Yeah, and there's just a hint of the zesty citrus, the top notes in there. Okay, let's taste it. There's incredible viscosity in there. It's almost ever so slightly oily in there. Very soft, very gentle, but it has this lovely syrupy, dessert-like character to it. Okay, second bigger sip now. Oh my goodness. You know, there's lashings of white chocolate, there's vanilla, there's apricots in there, there's pineapple, there's something almost like almond croissants, something like that, but it's all these amazing dessert-like flavours in there. And you know, we've made whiskies like this in the Glenmorangie range before, but I think we really have taken this to the next level. So ladies and gents, this is a limited release. There's only a few thousand cases available, so this will sell out very quickly. But please, ladies and gents, join us, get hold of a bottle of this and explore for yourself the amazing, wonderful dessert-like flavours that you will find in Glenmorangie, A Tale of Cake. And I don't think you need to try too hard, ladies and gents, to find what sort of foods would go with this whiskey. Obviously, it's all these amazing desserts in there. And you know, I gave you a hint with the almond croissant, a bit of pecan nut. There's a lot going on there. So, an incredibly delicious whiskey, Glenmorangie, A Tale of Cake. Okay, we're going to have a complete change in character now, because we're now going to focus on our other whiskey distillery, the legendary Ardbeg on the island of Islay. Now, Islay is a small island off the west coast of Scotland, actually situated in the Irish Sea. There are only 3,500 inhabitants on the island of Islay, but currently there are 9 single malt whisky distilleries, with Ardbeg being one of the most famous of these. Now, the whiskies in Islay are generally renowned for making an old-fashioned style of whisky, where the malted barley is still dried over a fire of peat. And the burning peat infuses the malted barley with all these incredible oily, tarry, smoky flavours. And Ardbeg has always been renowned for being one of the peatiest whiskies made in Scotland. However, there is another facet to the production process which I think really distinguishes Ardbeg from its peer group, and that is the distillation. Because on our spirit still at Ardbeg, we currently only have 2 stills at Ardbeg, 1 wash still and 1 spirit still, but that is going to be doubled, and later on this year we will be distilling with 4 stills. But on the spirit still, on what we call the line arm, which is where it just goes over the swan neck, we have a little device called a purifier. And the purifier essentially does the same job of the tall necks at Glenmorangie, in that it traps some of the condensing vapours, returns them to the still, and they're redistilled. And this introduces this little bit of complexity to Ardbeg, which just helps ever so slightly to balance out the intensity of the peat smoke. Now, the wee Beastie we have here is the latest addition to the Ardbeg range. It's one of the first new aged expressions we've had for a long time in the range. We introduced a 19-year-old last year, so a much older Ardbeg, but a lot of Ardbeg consumers really want to get as close to the distillation as possible. So we decided to introduce a much younger expression, and you know, this is a 5-year-old which we've put loud and proud on the label. So with the wee Beastie, we can expect an incredibly intense sensory experience. I use 2 different types of barrels for the maturation. I use the classic American oak ex-bourbon barrels, and I'm using some sherry casks in the recipe as well, primarily Oloroso, although I might change the recipe as this whisky develops. So it's a lovely deep gold colour. The deepness comes from the sherry casks in there, and at full strength, you know, right away, this is very different from the delicate, sweet Glenmorangies we've tasted. This is altogether more salty, briny, more medicinal. And you know, at full strength, you could be forgiven for thinking, well, this is quite smoky. But wait till you taste it, ladies and gents, and then you'll get the full intense smokiness. So again, I'm just going to cut this with a little bit water. And you know, with water, not only has it brought out more of the tarriness of the whisky, but it has, for the first time, revealed some of these top notes, which to me in Ardbeg always makes me think of fennel, something like that, or pine resin, something unusual like that. But yeah, underneath it, there's just this salty, tarry base. So ladies and gents, brace yourselves and join me for the first taste of the wee Beastie. Oh my goodness. You know, I used the words delicacy, finesse for Glenmorangie. There's nothing delicate about this at all. This is almost like a slap to the face. This is one of the most intense raw Ardbegs we've ever bottled. And you know, you can see on the plate in front of me there, there's cracked black pepper, there's sea salt, there's beef jerky, you know, there's all sorts of salty, savoury things going on in the taste. Now that my palate has recovered, I'm going to do my normal and take a much bigger sip of the wee Beastie. Oh, this is just so salty, so tarry, so briny, and you know, it's bursting with almost like tar and creosote and molasses. Something very savoury in there, you know, like savoury smoked meats. And it's got this incredible medicinal character. You know, it's like peppermint, it's like eucalyptus. If you can imagine suffering from a cold and taking a very, very strong antiseptic lozenge, that's kind of what you're getting with the Ardbeg wee Beastie. You know, if I have a sore throat or a cold these days, ladies and gents, I don't take lozenges anymore. I take a sip of the wee Beastie. So I'm going to try this once more. Oh, this really is a monster of a dram. And if you want a little bit of fun, ladies and gents, and find out a bit more information about the wee Beastie, then log on to the Ardbeg website, where there are some details of the product and a fun, light-hearted tasting film. But I have to say, this really is, to me, the most intensely flavoured Ardbeg we've released for a long time. So there you have it, the Ardbeg wee Beastie. And as I said right at the start, you know, in terms of taste profile, I think the Glenmorangie Original we started off with and the Ardbeg wee Beastie, you know, they're not just poles apart, they're almost planets apart in terms of the difference in flavour. The Ardbeg wee Beastie, you know, we launched it very recently, and you know, I've been quite amazed at how successful it's been so far. I'm actually struggling to keep up with supplying enough liquid for bottling, such as the demand been for this. And you know, in terms of awards, this expression is already starting to win some awards for the company. And this year at the International Whisky Competition, the wee Beastie won the prize for the best single malt Scotch whisky aged 10 years and under. So hopefully many more awards like that to come. So we tasted just 3 whiskies in the range today, ladies and gents. We started off with the wonderful classic Glenmorangie, the original, which shows tremendous finesse, complexity, delicacy, and is a very versatile whisky in terms of the way we drink it. We then moved on to the exciting and utterly delicious new expression, a tale of cake. So I said a limited expression, but showcasing these incredible dessert cake-like flavours. So, you know, please try that while you can. And then we finished off with arguably the most intensely tasting whisky we've had in our range, the Ardbeg wee Beastie. So if you enjoyed these, the good news is, ladies and gents, that we have plenty more expressions in both the Glenmorangie and the Ardbeg ranges. So please do give them a go if you get an opportunity. And all that remains for me to say now is to thank you all very much for joining me today. I had a lot of fun taking you through the tasting of these unique expressions. I'm sure you did as well, ladies and gents, and I look forward to having the opportunity to speak with you again sometime in the future. Thank you very much. And as we say in Scotland, Sláinte.